Namaskar, this is News Night on DD India. My name is Mark Lynn, and on the show tonight, we'll be expanding on the deliberations at the Delhi Regional Security Dialogue on Afghanistan and put into context the geopolitics of Central Asia and the impact of the Taliban rule in Afghanistan on the region. Also important decisions of the Union Cabinet, like declaring 15th of November as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. This is a day dedicated to the dignity and respect for tribal identity. Now, an update also we'll be giving you from COP26, because the targets in Glasgow, they are on, and as the conference draws to a close, and so there's a lot of deliberations on that. But let's begin with the headlines. Third Regional Security Dialogue on Afghanistan adopts Delhi Declaration. Participating nations express support for a peaceful, secure and stable Afghanistan. They strongly condemn terrorism in all forms and manifestations and agree that Afghan territory should not be used for sheltering, training, planning or financing terrorist acts. The participating national security advisors or their equivalents call on Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Prime Minister emphasizes on addressing the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan and the need for an inclusive government, as well as zero tolerance on Afghan territory being used by terrorist groups and a strategy to counter trafficking of drugs and arms from Afghanistan. The US becomes the 101st member of the International Solar Alliance. The Biden climate envoy John Kerry says that the US is happy to join the alliance set up by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The Environment Minister Bhupinder Yadav says that the move will strengthen ISA and propel future action on clean energy. India-Netherlands launch mission integrated bio-refineries to scale up clean energy solutions at affordable cost at COP26. The integrated biorefineries use multiple biomass conversion pathways to produce value-added products. Fumio Kishida is re-elected as Japan's Prime Minister by the Parliament of Japan, and he retains his earlier cabinet except for one change: Yoshimasa Hayashi as the Foreign Minister, who has close links to China. Cabinet approves November 15 as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. The day is the birth anniversary of the tribal freedom fighter and social reformer Birsa Munda. Week-long celebrations from November 15th to November 22. The Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs clears 17,408 crore rupees financial assistance to Cotton Commission of India for the last 7 years. The move will benefit 60 lakh farmers. Also approves 100% food grain packaging and 20% sugarcane packaging for sugar packaging, in fact, for jute bags, in jute bags. Our top story, the Third Regional Security Dialogue on Afghanistan. It concluded that the Taliban-ruled countries' territories cannot be used for terror activities. 5 Central Asian republics, Russia and Iran, joined India in acknowledging the Delhi Declaration, and it supported a stable, inclusive Afghanistan, reaffirmed a firm commitment to combat terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, including financing, infrastructure, radicalization, and also to ensure that the country never becomes a safe haven for global terrorism. Here's our report. India hosted the Delhi Regional Security Dialogue on Afghanistan on Wednesday. This is the third regional dialogue in the NSA Secretaries of Security Council format on the subject of Afghanistan. The other two were hosted by Iran prior to the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. This is the first meeting since the Taliban takeover and is also the first time all Central Asian countries, not just Afghanistan's immediate land neighbors, are participating in this format. Iran, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan participated in the dialogue. The Delhi Declaration expressed deep concern over suffering of Afghan people and condemned terrorist attacks in Kunduz, Kandahar and Kabul. It stressed on the necessity of forming an open, truly inclusive government representing the will of all Afghan people. Inclusion of all sections of society and administrative and political structure also found place in the declaration. It condemned in the strongest terms all terrorist activities. The leaders reiterated strong support for a peaceful, secure and stable Afghanistan respecting its sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity, non-interference in its internal affairs. Afghan territory should not be used for sheltering, training, planning and financing terrorist acts. Reaffirmed firm commitment to combat terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, combat terror financing, work towards dismantling of terrorist infrastructure, counter radicalization and ensure Afghanistan never becomes a safe haven for global terrorism, collective cooperation against radicalization, extremism, separatism and drug trafficking. Fundamental rights of women, children and minority communities should not be violated. Provide urgent humanitarian assistance to people of Afghanistan. Humanitarian assistance should be unimpeded, direct and assured. Provide assistance to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in Afghanistan. Host NSA Ajit Doval pointed out the importance of close consultations and greater cooperation among the regional countries. He hoped the deliberations would contribute to helping the people of Afghanistan.
We all have been keenly watching the developments in that country. These have important implications not only for the people of Afghanistan, but also for its neighbors and the region. This is the time for close consultations amongst us, greater cooperation and interaction and coordination among the regional countries.
All partner nations held fast to principles that would support a stable Afghanistan.
The current situation creates extra risk and possibility for growth of drug trafficking, terrorism and criminality. The situation on the Tajik and Afghan border remains complicated, and we as the neighboring country are ready to participate in all programs that can help to the people of Afghanistan.
Basically, in Afghanistan, you have just crisis, the crisis of migration and refugees. And the solution comes only through the formation of an inclusive government with the participation of all ethnic groups.
We are also convinced that such dialogue mechanisms should not duplicate the work of each other, but rather complement each other.
The countries agreed to remain engaged with each other in the future and will hold the next round of their dialogue in 2022. They also called on Prime Minister Narendra Modi after their meeting and apprised him of their deliberations. This is the third regional security dialogue on Afghanistan. The first two meetings in Iran were in September 2018 and December 2019. Newsnight Desk, DD India. So let's put into context now the geopolitics of the Afghan security dialogue. So this is the Delhi Regional Security Dialogue on Afghanistan, and it saw an expanded participation this time round. We saw Iran, Kazakhstan, the Kyrgyz Republic, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan also participating. So for the first time, in fact, all the Central Asian countries are participating in this format. The Taliban, of course, was not invited. India and the other participants don't recognize the current Afghan dispensation. So in a larger context now, what has Afghanistan got to do with this region? We know that if we look at this map, we can see how close India and Afghanistan are geographically. And of course, Pakistan and China are India's neighbors and also have a relevance there. And we see that both Pakistan and China were invited for this conference, but they did not attend. China, of course, citing scheduling issues, and Pakistan had alleged that India is playing a negative role in Afghanistan. Now, Iran is happy that the US is out of Afghanistan, but they say that their relations with Afghanistan will be based on the Taliban's behavior. Kazakhstan is a major exporter of wheat to Afghanistan. In fact, this wheat that is exported to Afghanistan is paid for by foreign agencies. So it's quite important for Kazakhstan, also for Afghanistan. Otherwise, you know, in terms of their foreign policy, they basically follow Russia's lead. Now, Tajikistan opposed Taliban's takeover. 25% of the population of Afghanistan are Tajiks, but the Taliban, you know, they are willing to improve their relationships with Tajikistan because of the Tajik population in Afghanistan. But if we look back to, you know, some of the resistance against the Taliban, the Panjshir Tajiks, they who opposed the Taliban, they reportedly didn't get much support, and they didn't even expect much support from Tajikistan. Let's look at Russia, Moscow. Moscow has been building contacts with the Taliban now for some time, and they support what's called national reconciliation. They believe that law and order will return to the streets of Afghanistan, and that will end years of bloodshed. They didn't quite think that what was happening in Afghanistan earlier was actually very good for Afghanistan. So Moscow is also playing what's called the waiting game, which is considered the pragmatic game. And Turkmenistan, it has accepted the new reality in Afghanistan. It has checkpoints on the Turkmen-Afghanistan border, and they function in a regular mode. So Afghanistan imports nearly about 320 million kilowatt hours of electricity every year from Turkmenistan, an important supplier of electricity to Afghanistan. Uzbekistan's foreign minister had led a delegation to Kabul post the Taliban's takeover. So energy, trade, transport projects were discussed. Now Tashkent has been keen on maintaining some momentum despite, you know, the Taliban ruled Afghanistan, because they have a number of interests in Afghanistan. Kyrgyzstan, they do not share a border with Afghanistan. So what's happened is that they hosted a major US airbase outside Bishkek for a long time, right from the beginning of the war, in a sense, against the war against terror, which started in 2001, and then it continued right up to that Bishkek air base continued right up to about 2014. But Bishkek is, in fact, it's taking a practical approach now in dealing with the new leaders of Kabul. So that brings us to our In Focus discussion tonight. And so what are we discussing? We are discussing the Delhi Declaration and working towards a stable, inclusive, and a stable, inclusive Afghanistan. Towards a stable, inclusive Afghanistan, we have with us Ambassador T.C.A. Raghavan, I beg your pardon. T.C.A. Raghavan is a former High Commissioner to Pakistan, and Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Ambassador Raghavan, let me start with you. So what's the importance, put it into context for us, of national security advisors meeting in this regional context and discussing terrorism?
Well, what is very clear is that to a great extent, the issues confronting Afghanistan are security related. So that the national security advisors of many of Afghanistan's neighbors, and especially those from Central Asia, coming together with India, Iran, and Russia to discuss regional cooperative mechanisms to address these security issues. So I would say that this meeting certainly will be part of a larger process of meetings which are taking place, but it is an important step towards evolving a regional consensus. We by no means are close to a regional consensus, because this meeting, despite the declaratory agreement which has been reached, there are many points of detail which cannot be addressed in a meeting of this kind, principally because the Taliban is not, or the regime in Afghanistan, currently running Afghanistan, is not party to it. But it does enable a regional approach to develop, and I therefore see this meeting as an important step towards the crystallization of such a regional approach.
Mr. Sushant Sareen, looking at the threat perception in terms of terrorism that comes out of Afghanistan and Pakistan, the Prime Minister said when he met when these national security advisors or their equivalents called on him, he talked about zero tolerance policy towards, you know, towards Afghanistan soil being used for any terror activities or by terrorist groups. The zero tolerance aspect, how important is that, going down to all these countries, that they all have to have a zero tolerance policy for this to succeed?
Look, there are two things to this. One, you can say that you want to have a zero tolerance policy. But if supposing there is that terrorism which is coming from Afghanistan into you, then what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. Invade Afghanistan, there were much more powerful countries which did it, and what did they get out of it? So it's one thing to say it, and another thing to build certain cooperative mechanisms, which I think this particular conference could be one of the building blocks in building those cooperative mechanisms. The second thing, for me, this conference really, apart from what would have happened behind the scenes in the bilaterals, if I just look at what the declaration is, yes, I see a major break from what India's policy towards the Taliban was in the 90s, for example, when they were in power, to what it is now. If you look at the very first clause where India is talking about a stable Afghanistan, talking about non-interference in Afghanistan, actually not India, all these 8 countries.
All these countries, yes.
Signing on to that. To my mind, it signifies that we are ready to adjust to the reality of Taliban. We have reconciled to it.
Okay.
And the rest of the, the clauses which follow from this declaration are what is expected for the Taliban to do, which is again nothing new.
Right.
You stop terrorism, you ensure that minorities are taken care of, inclusive government, all of that. So that is pretty standard stuff. But I think the very first clause, as an Indian, and perhaps the ambassador will be able to shed more light on this, because he's been there, done that. Our approach to Afghanistan under Taliban in the 90s was very different. We were, in a manner of speaking, interfering in what was happening out there.
Okay.
Stability under the Taliban was not something that we were rooting for.
True.
Today we are reconciling to that, at least if this declaration is anything to go by. So for me, that was the real takeaway of what has happened today.
Ambassador Bhagwan, so, respecting the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Afghanistan and not interfering in the internal affairs of a country is standard, isn't it, international practice. But there is certain aspects here that have been added, which means that the Taliban has to conform or live up to expectations of various other countries, in fact, the entire world, including the 8 countries that participated here. So do you think that, that is basically conditional, what the point 1 of the declaration is?
Well, everything about Afghanistan is conditional, because nobody can precisely predict the turn which events will take. But I wish to make 2 points in this context. Firstly, for the past 50 years, we have seen this issue of an inclusive Afghanistan, which is representative of Afghanistan's diversity, what kind of a governmental system, what kind of architecture can evolve. And clearly the lesson of those last 50 years is that it has not been easy to construct an architecture which is inclusive. So in that sense, if the Taliban takes these declaratory statements seriously, and that is a big if, this would be another attempt to have a more inclusive and stable regime. The jury is still out on whether that is going to happen. The second point which Mr. Sushant Sareen made is an important one, that there is clearly some shift in our position, but I would view this in a larger context. I think many countries have introspected on the events of the past 4 or 5 months, and also of the history of the past 20 years. The manner in which an entire structure been constructed with so much external assistance and so much external investment came apart so quickly does suggest that the Taliban cannot be treated in the way it was in the 1990s. I think this is a conclusion which we are moving towards, and it is similarly a conclusion which other countries are also moving towards. It is not as if we were the only ones who had major objections to the Taliban, because barring 2 or 3 countries, even in the 1990s, most of the world had a pretty jaundiced view of it. But what has clearly changed is that it has to be, what is recognized is that some engagement with this, with the Taliban appears necessary, not out of choice, but out of necessity. So I think that is really the question which many countries, especially neighbors of Afghanistan like India have to confront and deal with in all seriousness.
Mr. Sareen, what would you say about a message to Pakistan and China, who didn't attend this meeting? Of course, Pakistan for its own reasons, but China said that there were scheduling issues. But, you know, you did mention that there may be a shift in policy from India. What do you see the read into the declaration? Could there be a message for these countries as well?
No, I think, you know, I think we should be, I think we should thank the Pakistanis for being honest why they didn't attend. Because as their national security advisor said, that spoilers can't be peacemakers. And since the Pakistanis are the biggest spoilers, it's good that they were not involved in peacemaking, because nothing would have come, nothing positive would have come if they had come to India. The Chinese, of course, their game in Afghanistan is basically riding on the shoulders of the Pakistanis. Actually, the client-patron relationship between China and Pakistan kind of gets turned on its head when it comes to Afghanistan. Although the Chinese will still have to foot the bill. The Pakistanis don't have money to run their own country. What are they going to run Afghanistan? But having said that, I think the 8 countries that were present today in Delhi have similar interests, have similar concerns. Right. They might be approaching this differently, but their concerns are more or less the same. Now, the thing is that as far as this declaration goes, and why I think it is very important is that I look at this declaration in 2 parts. The first part is, of course, that very first clause, or the very first item of the declaration, where all these countries are saying that, look, we might have whatever reservations and everything, which everybody is very clear about, but we are ready to acknowledge, you know, the sovereignty, territorial integrity, non-interference, all of that spiel has been given. That's the olive branch to the Taliban. In return, I think there are other clauses specify what is expected of the Taliban. So I think it's a kind of, and if you will, it's a kind of an overture to the Taliban. And I think let's see how this proceeds. That is one. Secondly, I don't know, again, I'm not a diplomat, and we have a diplomat in our midst, and perhaps Ambassador Bhagwan can shed more light.
Right.
I wonder whether we should not have used this opportunity to perhaps invite someone from the Taliban to also participate. After all, if you're opening doors, then a multilateral setting is not such a bad idea, especially one which you're holding in your own country, is not such a bad idea to invite them. You could have made excuse that it's a multilateral setting and we are calling the Taliban.
It might give the indication that there's recognition taking place. But let's bring in Ambassador Bhagwan here.
No, one second, Mark. 1 second.
Yeah.
There are other countries which have invited the Taliban in multilateral settings without holding out any assurance or any promise of recognition. So I don't know why we are so, you know, shy of getting into playing this game.
Fair enough. Ambassador Bhagwan, about the countries that are involved, many of them are, you know, have close links with Russia because of the, you know, historical links. And their trade relations with Afghanistan are quite strong. And the fact Kazakhstan, for instance, supplies 60% of the wheat that Afghanistan has. So, and Turkmenistan supplies a large amount of their electricity. And Tajikistan has, you know, an ethnic interest as well. So, I mean, how would you look, what kind of leverage do these countries have, or stake in a sense in Afghanistan?
All these countries have a major stake because there are huge ethnic overlaps between Afghanistan and some of them. They would be the first countries who are hit if there's a major humanitarian crisis and there are massive refugee movements and other reasons. So they all have a major stake. And in an immediate tactical sense, because There are reports of a humanitarian crisis looming in Afghanistan.
Right.
These will also be the countries which can provide external assistance. But the central problem in Afghanistan today, and it has been so for some time, is not a question of external assistance. I read somewhere that the United States invested more in Afghanistan in real terms in the past 20 years than it had put into the Marshall Plan in Europe after World War II. Now, that is a humongous amount of financial assistance. But the problem in Afghanistan is an internal one. Okay. How do you harmonize different internal conflicts and bring together an architecture in which everyone feels they have a stake? Till that central problem is resolved, external assistance is not going to provide any easy answers for the dilemmas which Afghanistan faces.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for in this discussion. I'd like to thank our guests, Ambassador T.C.A. Raghavan and Sushant Sareen. Thank you very much for enlightening us on this important subject. Moving on then to our next story, the Union Minister for Science and Technology, Dr. Jitendra Singh, addressed the Mission Innovative Initiative at COP26, and he highlighted the Indo-Dutch effort of integrated bio-refineries. These scale up clean energy solutions at affordable costs. Mission Innovation, in fact, is actively engaged in scaling up clean energy solutions across the world.
In a big boost to accelerate global adoption of solar energy, the United States of America, USA, has become the 101st country to join the International Solar Alliance, ISA, to catalyze global energy transition through a solar-led approach. Signing the framework agreement, US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, said, "It has long been coming and we are happy to join the International Solar Alliance, which Prime Minister Narendra Modi took the lead in making. This will be an important contribution to more rapid deployment of solar energy globally." India, in turn, welcomed the USA as the 101st member of the ISA. Union Cabinet Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Bhupender Yadav, said this move will strengthen the ISA and propel future action on providing a clean source of energy to the world. Earlier at COP26, the United States also joined the steering committee of the Green Grid Initiative, One Sun, One World, One Grid, comprising of 5 members, the USA, Australia, France, the United Kingdom and India, and endorsed the One Sun Declaration along with 80 countries. India has called for a commitment from the global clean energy community for access to sustainable fuels, chemicals and materials to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and achieve global climate goals as one of the mitigation measures. Addressing the Mission Innovation Initiative at COP26 on Tuesday, Union Minister for Science and Technology, Dr. Jitendra Singh, drew attention to the efforts made by India and the Netherlands, along with Mission Innovation members, in taking forward the Mission Innovation 2.0. The two nations launched Mission Integrated Bio-refineries to scale up clean energy solutions at an affordable cost. The minister said India, through Mission Innovation, is actively engaged in collaborative efforts to catalyze inspiring innovation goals that will lead to affordable and scale up of clean energy solutions.
India, with the Netherlands, aims to leverage its extensive experience in research and innovation, support for the startup ecosystem, international collaborations through the launch of Mission Integrated Bio-refineries. The Mission Integrated Bio-refineries brings together a dynamic and a delivery-focused alliance of countries, the private sector, the research institutes, and the civil society to accelerate innovation in renewable fuels, chemicals, and materials for a low-carbon future.
22 governments and the European Commission, collaborating through Mission Innovation, announced 4 groundbreaking missions to catalyze investment and action to make the clean energy technologies which will decarbonize sectors. Mission Integrated Bio-refineries is one among them. The missions, announced by ministers from the US, India, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Australia, Austria, the Netherlands, and the European Commission, will accelerate technologies to facilitate urban transitions, enable carbon dioxide removal, and produce renewable fuels, chemicals and materials. Combined with 3 missions first announced in June 2021 on power systems, hydrogen and shipping, they have the potential to unlock affordable decarbonization pathways for sectors responsible for 52% of the current global emissions. This will accelerate progress towards the Paris Agreement goals and pathways to net zero. On Wednesday at COP26, global auto players including ministers, vehicle manufacturers and business leaders have gathered to show their commitment to a zero-emission road transport future by 2040 or earlier. Transport Day at COP26 will also try to secure commitments on lowering emissions in aviation and shipping. A shift to zero-emission vehicles is already underway, creating new jobs, bringing cleaner air to cities and increasingly cutting the costs of car ownership. To meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, this transition needs to happen much more quickly. It must include not only cars, but vans, buses, trucks and lorries. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
And to discuss this, we have with us R.R. Rashmi, who's the Distinguished Fellow at TERI and former Special Secretary, Ministry of Environment. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. First, let's start with the importance of the United States joining the International Solar Alliance. So what sort of impetus will this give to the mission of the International Solar Alliance, and also perhaps, in a larger context, climate justice?
Thank you very much for having me on your show. This is indeed a historic moment. The ISA has been in existence for the last 5-6 years now, and it is only now that US has agreed to formally join. India and France had originally led this institution, and US is one of the global leaders in all kinds of energy, including solar energy. So therefore, their joining this is a very significant signal to the rest of the world that US is now fully behind this global coalition of countries which are interested in promoting solar energy, right, renewable energy. As you know, US is the primary mover of technology. It is the storehouse of latest technology as well. So its joining the ISA will provide a great amount of leadership and technological push, and also financial muscle to the organization, which it has lacked so far. The objective of the ISA is to promote solar energy in all its partner countries. And India is one of the leading countries which is making investments in this field. So US and India have also set up a clean energy financing platform. If you remember, John Kerry, when he had come to India in the first week of the first part of this year, at that time this platform was set up. So this also, if you read these two things together, it means that US has now decided to walk step by step along with India as far as promoting renewable energy is concerned, not only in India but also globally.
Indeed, but if we look at also the importance of one sun, one world, one grid, the grid is important, for the 24-hour cycle of utilizing the sun's rays, because one part of the world will always be having the sun and it will be utilized there and transmitted to other parts. Do you think that the US can actually play a significant role in that, because not only do they have the finances, they probably also have the technology?
Yes, in fact, that's extremely important, but I think that's a little into the future. Because this One World, One Sun, One Grid initiative has just been launched, and I think initially the idea is to collaborate with those countries which have already established green grids and where they have potential of regional transmigration of energy and establishing grids like that. Now, US is quite far from India in that sense. Okay. So establishing a grid along with India, with the US may happen, but that is something in the future. Okay. Currently, we will have to focus on our regional partners and the other partners which have interest in establishing a green grid. But the most significant part of US involvement in ISA, as I said, is the element of technology and finance.
Indeed. And that would work towards climate justice also. But let's talk about a little bit about the Indo-Dutch effort called integrated bio-refineries and how this is going to affect clean energy solutions at affordable costs. This is basically a conversion of, it's a biomass conversion, isn't it? Utilizing various ways, multiple systems to try and convert waste into various other kinds of products that are useful. How significant, I mean, is this the technology that, is going to be transformative in a sense, both in our country and perhaps across the world?
Absolutely. If you look at the future of the biofuels, this step, which has been announced by under the Mission of Innovation, is extremely important. If you remember, the Prime Minister only a few months ago advanced our target of biofuel blending to 2025 instead of 2030 to the extent of 20%. And we also have a blending requirement in biodiesel. So if we really want to achieve our 20% blending requirement of ethanol in petrol, we will have to substantially create production capacity of sustainable biofuels within the country. There are very few countries which have this production capacity. Brazil is a leading country in the sustainable biofuels. Biofuel technology is amongst the most developed because they have they basically source it from maize, corn.
Right.
And similarly in the US, they also have corn-based biofuels. China is another large producer. India does not have this facility at all. Some of the European players have this facility. So India and Netherlands coming together to announce a mission on bio-refineries is a great idea. This will help India build up substantial production capacity in sustainable biofuels. And this is extremely required because we have to meet not only our domestic goals, but in future, we also have to meet the requirements of the aviation industry.
Okay.
Aviation industry is a global industry, and it has decided to go net zero carbon and net zero by 2050. And they also have a market-based scheme of emissions reduction, CORSIA, under which there is a requirement of reducing emissions. So they have to use sustainable biofuels. And for this, we need basically our industry, which has to participate in this scheme, they need access to sustainable biofuels. So this is a great idea.
Right.
And, and there are many sources, there are many technologies, not just solid waste to biofuels.
True.
There are 2-3 technologies here. We can use cooking oil, we can use plant-based, we can use solid waste. So the HIFA technology, so there are different technologies depending on their cost effectiveness. Any one of them can be used for setting up these biorefineries. The
question is, of course, I mean, they are sustainable, but the question is about emissions. Do they emit? What is the kind of carbon footprint that comes out of the burning of these kind of fuels?
Much less, because they are basically replacing the current natural gas and the oil, which is fossil fuel. So sustainable biofuel is almost 1 to 2%. There is no carbon there. They are plant-based, so their carbon emissions are much less, all practically zero, almost near zero, as far as compared to current fossil fuels are concerned. So that is why they are called sustainable fuels. So they can be sourced either from plants or agricultural produce or solid waste. So different technologies are there. And biorefineries mission is a process which will help India access this technology of producing and accessing and distributing these fuels for our industry.
Mr. Rashmi, thank you very much for joining us, and we will take your views, once the COP draft document is finally approved, and we'll see, what those outcomes are. Thanks very much for being with us. Moving on then to our next story, the British hosts of COP26, the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow, they proposed that countries should raise their ambitions to slash greenhouse gas emissions by next year. The draft political decision will be negotiated over the next 3 days, and the draft now forces countries to set tougher climate targets next year. That's what the most vulnerable countries want of the most polluting countries. Here's a report.
A draft cover decision setting out the potential outcome from the COP26 climate summit has been published by the UK presidency of the talks. The document urges countries to revisit and strengthen their domestic climate pledges for 2030 by the end of next year to try to give the world a better chance of limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, the aspiration of the Paris Agreement. The document will have to be negotiated and agreed upon by countries attending the talks. UK's COP26 President Alok Sharma held an informal stock-taking plenary in the late evening briefing about the released draft.
It's about whether we are still pushing for keeping 1.5 alive. I would just say to all colleagues, please think back to what Mia Mottley said at the World Leaders Summit, where she made the point that 2 degrees for her country and many other island states was going to be a death sentence. Look at the details of the draft, the cover text. It makes references to countries coming back ahead of the stock take. It makes references to census reports being on an annual basis.
The draft stresses on extending more financial and other help to vulnerable nations to cope with the deadly impacts of global warming. Loss and damage has been included in the draft, with encouragement to richer countries to scale up their action and support, including finance for poorer nations. It urges countries to submit long-term strategies for reaching net zero by the end of next year. The attempt is to pen down a series of significant steps that will prevent global temperature rises going above 1.5 degrees Celsius this century. The draft calls on all parties to revisit and strengthen the 2030 targets in their nationally determined contributions. It also calls on countries to accelerate the phasing out of coal and subsidies for fossil fuels. It also asks countries to come back by the end of next year with a new, improved, short-term carbon-cutting plan. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson issued a statement urging world leaders to come together to reach an agreement to help curb climate change. Together with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Johnson met representatives from national negotiating teams and groups representing civil society. On 1st of November, Prime Minister Narendra Modi presented India's national statement at Glasgow. Presenting India's track record, he stated that India is at number 4 in the world in installed renewable energy capacity. India's non-fossil fuel energy has increased by more than 25% in the last 7 years and is now 40% of the national energy mix. He presented India's Panchamrit climate action commitments. India will raise its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatt by 2030. India will meet 50% of its energy requirements from renewable energy by 2030. India will reduce the total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from now onwards till 2030. By 2030, India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by less than 45%. By the year 2070, India will achieve the target of net zero.
जब हम सभी क्लाइमेट एक्शन पर अपने एम्बिशन बढ़ा रहे हैं, तब क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस पर विश्व के एम्बिशन वहीं नहीं रह सकते जो पेरिस एग्रीमेंट के समय थे। आज जब भारत ने एक नए कमिटमेंट और एक नई ऊर्जा के साथ आगे बढ़ने का संकल्प लिया है, तो ऐसे समय में क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस और लो कॉस्ट क्लाइमेट टेक्नोलॉजीज का ट्रांसफर और महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है।
Diplomats from nearly 200 countries represented at COP26 will hunker down to negotiate a final text they're all willing to sign when the summit ends this weekend. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
The Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida was re-elected by the parliament as Prime Minister after his ruling Liberal Democratic Party. The LDP won a strong majority in last month's lower house election. The vote on Wednesday was a formality given the dominance of his party in parliament and its junior coalition partner after the LDP won 261 of the 465 seats in the lower house, which is the powerful house. Kishida is also set to reappoint, in fact he has reappointed all but one of his ministers from the previous lineup, announced last month after he was elected by the parliament following the victory in the LDP chief race, that is the legislative party leader race, after his predecessor Suga resigned in September. Amid rising tensions, between Belarus and Poland over a migrant crisis at their mutual border. 2 Russian strategic bombers carried out flights over Belarus, Russia's defense ministry said on Wednesday, releasing video, in fact, showing these jets in the air. Russia's defense ministry said that the Tu-22 M3 bombers patrolled the airspace and helped test Belarus and Russia's joint air defense system. The European Council President Charles Michel said that the EU needs to make up its mind if it is ready to finance fences to help countries such as Poland and Lithuania in protecting the bloc's external borders against a hybrid attack by Belarus. Now, holding a news conference in Warsaw after meeting the Polish Prime Minister, Michel said that he hoped the EU will make a decision on the matter as soon as possible. Poland's Prime Minister Morawiecki said that the EU needs to block flights from the Middle East to Belarus to stem the flow of migrants trying to enter the EU external border, eastern side. Hundreds of migrants remained stranded on the border between Belarus and Poland as the standoff continued between them and the Polish police standing in lines along with others. This is a razor wire also was there. Now many have arrived at the border on Monday. They had arrived there and have since then they've been waiting for passage into Poland and thus the European Union. So the EU accuses Belarus of encouraging the migrants from the Middle East, Afghanistan and Africa to try to illegally cross for revenge, in fact, for earlier sanctions which was imposed on Minsk. This is over human rights abuses. The Belarusian leader, Lukashenko, has denied using the migrants as a weapon. He did so on Wednesday, and he won a fresh show of support from his most powerful ally, Russia. In continuation of a tradition that's started in 1950, Nepal's Army Chief General Prabhu Ram Sharma was conferred with the honorary rank of General of the Indian Army by President Ramnath Kovind earlier today. Nepal is important for India in the context of the overall strategic interests in the region and also India-Nepal military cooperation. It's an important facet of our ties. Currently, about 32,000 Gorkha soldiers from Nepal serve in the Indian Army. The Nepalese Army's chief 4-day visit takes forward the revival of Indo-Nepal ties and was achieved when the Indian Army General Chief, the Indian Army Chief General Naravane, they visited that country last year in November. And let's look at Sudhir Yadav's report.
A ceremonial occasion that holds huge import in the current geopolitical context. President Ramnath Kovind conferred the honorary rank of General of the Indian Army to the Nepal Army Chief General Prabhu Ram Sharma. Earlier last year, Indian Army Chief General M.M. Naravane too was conferred the honorary rank of General of the Nepali Army by the President of Nepal, Bidya Devi Bhandari. The tradition of conferring the rank of Honorary General to the Chiefs of Army of Nepal and India started in 1950, with General K.M. Cariappa being the first Indian Army Chief to be decorated with the highest army title of Nepal. It reflects the close ties between the Indian and Nepalese armies and the deep trust and understanding between the two nations. Talking of India-Nepal military cooperation, the bonds are ancient but continue to be reinvigorated with time. India has been assisting the Nepal army in its modernization by supplying equipment and providing training. The Indo-Nepal battalion-level joint military exercise Surya Kiran is conducted alternately in India and Nepal. The 15th Surya Kiran exercise was held in September in Uttarakhand. In 2015, India was one of the first countries to respond to the devastating earthquake of 7.9 magnitude that hit Nepal. The joint operation of the Indian Army and the Indian Air Force displayed India's deepest commitment towards Nepal. During the peak of the COVID pandemic, the Indian Army provided medical equipment worth 42 crore Nepali rupees and to the 2 field hospitals of Nepal's army during the visit of the Indian Army Chief last year. The Indian Army also gifted 1 lakh doses of COVID-19 vaccines to the Nepalese Army in 2021. The Gorkha regiments of the Indian Army are raised partly by recruitment from hill districts of Nepal. Currently, about 32,000 Gorkha soldiers from Nepal are serving in the Indian Army. The Nepalese Army Chief's 4-day visit takes forward the revival of India-Nepal ties that was achieved when the Indian Army Chief General Naravane visited the country last year in November. With Sudhir Yadav, Newsnight Desk, DD India.
The Union Cabinet has approved the declaration of the 15th of November as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. It's the birth anniversary of Birsa Munda. There will be in fact week-long celebrations which will start on the 15th of November and it will continue till the 22nd of November to celebrate and commemorate the glorious history of the tribal people, their culture and achievements for our country. The Cabinet also approved the restoration and continuation of Member of Parliament Local Area Development Scheme, rupees 5 crore per annum in fact per Member of Parliament for the financial years 2022-23 to 2025-26. Here are the details.
The Union Cabinet on Wednesday approved the declaration of 15th November as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas, dedicated to the memory of brave tribal freedom fighters. The date is the birth anniversary of Birsa Munda, a tall tribal leader and freedom fighter.
भारतीय इतिहास और संस्कृति में जनजातियों का विशेष स्थान और उनके योगदान को सम्मानित करने के लिए और आने वाली पीढ़ियों को इस सांस्कृतिक विरासत और राष्ट्रीय गौरव के संरक्षण के लिए प्रेरित करने के उद्देश्य से 15 नवंबर को जनजातीय गौरव दिवस घोषित करने का निर्णय लिया गया है। भारत के स्वतंत्रता संग्राम में भी जनजातियों का बहुत महत्वपूर्ण योगदान रहा। भारत सरकार 15 नवंबर से 22 नवंबर तक जनजातीय समुदाय के गौरवशाली इतिहास और उनकी उपलब्धियों, संस्कृति और आज़ादी की लड़ाई में उनकी योगदान की महत्ता पर एक सप्ताह पूरा 15 से 22 नवंबर तक एक सप्ताह कार्यक्रम आयोजित करने जा रही है।
Birsa Munda fought bravely against the exploitative British colonial rule and spearheaded a movement against British oppression, giving a call for Ulgulan or revolution. The Cabinet also approved committed price support of 17,408 crore rupees to Cotton Corporation of India (CCI) as the corporation clears its previous dues. This will help over 60 lakh farmers who are directly engaged in the cotton industry.
कपास के क्षेत्र में लगभग 60 लाख किसान सीधे तौर पर जुड़े हुए हैं और जो पिछले 2 वर्ष थे कोविड के समय जहां एक और कपास का मूल्य कम था बाजार में, वहां पर बहुत महत्वपूर्ण हो गया था कि सरकार की इंटरवेंशन भी हो।
Decisions were also taken regarding the second cash crop of jute. The Cabinet approved reservation norms for jute packaging materials for jute year 2021-22, that is July 1st this year to June 30th next year, under JPM Act 1987. Accordingly, 100% food grains and 20% of sugar is to be packed in jute bags. This will help over 40 lakh farmers and 3.7 lakh jute mill workers involved in the jute industry. Further, the Cabinet also approved mechanism for procurement of ethanol by public sector oil marketing companies under ethanol blended petrol program.
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी के निर्देशानुसार अब वर्ष 2025 तक 20% ब्लेंडिंग प्राप्त करने का महत्वाकांक्षी लक्ष्य निर्धारित किया गया है। पहले लक्ष्य 2030 तक था, अब 2030 तक के लक्ष्य को भी प्रीपोन करके 2025 तक किया गया है
Talking about India's robust economic recovery post-pandemic across sectors, the Cabinet approved restoration and continuation of Member of Parliament Local Area Development MP LAD scheme. An amount of 2 crore rupees per MP will be given in one installment for the remaining period of the current financial year and 5 crore rupees in 2 installments during the financial years 2022-23 to 2025-26. With Rajesh Raj, Newsnight Desk, DD India.
And now news from around the country. Here's our national roundup.
Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh inaugurated the second biannual IAF Commanders Conference at Vayu Bhavan. Addressing the Air Force commanders on the inaugural day, Rajnath Singh appreciated the IAF for maintaining a high level of preparedness, ability to respond on a short notice, and displaying high standards of professionalism in carrying out operational and peacetime tasks. The Raksha Mantri remarked on the volatile situation on our borders and said that the armed forces need to be prepared to respond at a short notice for any contingency. Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath flagged off the trial run of Kanpur Metro. Under the primary section, metro trains will run on the priority corridor between IIT Kanpur and Moti Jheel. The project has been completed in less than a span of 2 years despite the pandemic outbreak. Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath today inspected the Integrated Command Center in Kanpur set up to stop the spread of infection. The Chief Minister also visited the Zika virus affected areas. Talking to reporters, the Chief Minister said that 105 positive cases related to Zika virus were found in Kanpur in the last 1 month, out of which 17 cases have turned negative. Local district administration, health department and municipal council has started a campaign to increase surveillance and sanitization work in the area. 3 more deaths due to dengue have been recorded in Delhi, taking the total number of fatalities to 9, while the number of cases of the vector-borne disease has climbed to over 2,708, which is more than double compared to the previous year. In Tamil Nadu, the death toll due to the ongoing rain spell has risen to 12. A red alert has been issued for 20 districts across Tamil Nadu, including Chennai, after a well-marked low-pressure area over the Bay of Bengal is expected to intensify into a depression and move west-northwest and reach Tamil Nadu's northern coast by Thursday morning. Heavy to very heavy rainfall is forecast over coastal and adjoining parts of the state as well as in Puducherry. In Rajasthan, 11 people died and several others were injured following a collision between a passenger bus and a truck near Pachpadra in Barmed district. Prime Minister Narendra Modi expressed grief over loss of lives in the accident. The Prime Minister also announced an ex-gratia of 2 lakh rupees each from the Prime Minister National Relief Fund, which would be given to the next of kin of those who lost their lives due to the accident. The injured would be given 50,000 rupees each.
That's all we have in Newsnight tonight. Thanks very much for being with us. Namaskar.